I have a post-it note on, that's why. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Please do come in.
Locked corporately and taken back to jail. If not guilty of all charges, cases are pending. For the plaintiff lawyer, he has waived his right to an attorney and is representing himself.
Hello, please come in. Please, can you turn your mics and your cameras off as much as it's lovely to see you all. Hi, everyone. I'm hoping everyone's in or on the way to being in. If you would like to leave a message, as usual, while we're waiting for everyone else. Oh, look at that. Brilliant. Thank you, Karen. Where are you from in the world? Please do let us know. That would be amazing. Fantastic. I hope everyone is well today. It's a wet, grey summer's day in the UK, I'm sure. I know a lot of you, some of you have got lovely weather. Please send it this way. That would be very nice. Lovely. Oh, wow. We've got Oslo, Canada. Where else have we got? York, fantastic. Minneapolis, Switzerland. Hello. Philadelphia, South Carolina, Kent. Wow, hello. This is great. Fantastic. So just to let you know, I've started, God, I hope I've started recording already.
Hmm.
So with a bit of luck, we will have this up. We'll have this on the Doings of Doyle. Yes, I can see a recording sign. That's good. What a good start. So I'm just going to say hello. Welcome to the 2025 Worldwide Doyle. We are honoured to be in our 5th year. This programme of lectures has come about from the fantastic Professor Neil McCaw. He was instrumental in the early days of the collection with cataloguing and getting the Conan Doyle into some resemblance of what it is today, as well as doing an awful lot of other work. So he wrote a few books. He also compiled a couple of exhibitions, some of which went global and travelled to overseas. So we really are indebted to the early work that he did with the collection. And so as you will have see, or as you will see in a minute, actually, we've got new branding, which is fantastic, which will hold that legacy there. Tonight we have a wonderful speaker, Burt Wolder, and I'm going to stop talking because this is all about Bert's talk. I'm going to let you introduce. So welcome, enjoy, and I will see you at the end for questions.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Laura. I'm delighted to be with you all and to see so many familiar names. And thank you for taking the time to listen to me and to think about, even more importantly, to think about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And what I want to talk about today is his life. And I have a rather personal sort of assessment of that. And it has to do with memory and remembering. And I'll tell you more about it as we go through. But it begins with this drawing, which I'm sure many of you have seen. Um, on one morning in 1930, not long before his death in July of that year, Sir Arthur began working on the drawing that you see here. It shows an emaciated workhorse pulling a heavy baggage cart, and a large pile of packing cases weighs the cart down. And each one of these cases is labeled with a memory of his life and work. So medical practice is piled alongside historical novels, and elections rests on top of psychic research. And there are tales of drama that prop up poems and the Great War. And perhaps the heaviest case in the pile is the one that's sandwiched in between 500 lectures and Australia in 1921, and that's Sherlock Holmes. And he is entitled the sketch The Old Horse. And down at the bottom, he has written, you probably can't make this out, Consultation of Vets, Webb, Johnson, Parkinson, and McIntosh. And those are the three little top-hatted figures on the left. Those are his doctors. And he's written there, the old horse has pulled a heavy load a long way, but he is well cared for. And with 6 weeks stable and 6 months grass, he will be on the road once more. I looked at this and I said to myself, what a life. You know, might we learn something from Conan Doyle's baggage cart about how to make memorable moments in our own lives? And that's really, what I will get to. So why don't we zoom in on some of these packing cases? And as we do so, I want to use as much as possible Conan Doyle's own words. So you'll have to put up with me reading some of these things. So Conan Doyle was born on May 22nd, 1859 at 11 Picardy Place in Edinburgh. He was the second child of Charles and Mary Doyle. He was the second of 9 children, of whom 7 survived. And this is a photograph of his family that dates to about 1904. And we'll come back to this. His great uncle, Michael Conan, was a distinguished journalist, and Arthur and his elder sister Annette received, in his case, the compound surname of Conan Doyle, but Annette was also Annette Conan Doyle. And in the background, of course, is that in 1855, at the age of 22, his father, Charles, had married 17-year-old Mary Foley, the granddaughter of his landlady. She was a lively, well-educated woman, and her love of books made a lasting impression on her son. She had, he said, a born storyteller's gift of sinking her voice to a horror-stricken whisper when she reached the crisis of a story. And he wrote in Memories and Adventures, in my early childhood, as far back as I can remember anything at all, the vivid stories which she would tell me stand out so clearly that they obscure the real facts of my life. Mary Doyle was fascinated by the traditions of chivalry, and she captivated her children with tales of knights and their quests. And there's a scene in Sir Nigel, one of Conan Doyle's historical novels, where Sir Nigel and his met sit spellbound as a French noblewoman, the Lady Tiphaine, the wife of a famous soldier, spins tales of knightly deeds. And that example is, I said I was going to read some things. The mind had gone out of them, and they could but look at this woman and listen to the words which fell from her lips, words which thrilled through their nerves and stirred their souls like the battle call of a bugle. That sweet, clear voice, with its high, thrilling talk of the deathlessness of glory, of the worthlessness of life, of the pain of ignoble joy, and of the joy which lies in all pains which lead to a noble end. And still, as the shadows deepened, she spoke of valor and virtue, of loyalty, honor, and fame. And still, they sat drinking in her words while the fire burned down and the red ash turned to gray. As a boy, Conan Doyle loved the stories of Mayne Reid, Thomas Mayne Reid. He was an Irish Scots novelist who fought in the Mexican-American War. And that provided Conan Doyle's first taste of the American West. And so when he was later to come to the United States on his first tour, and he took tours through the Rockies, he writes this in his memoir, my goodness, there are the Rockies, my Rockies. It's the same scene, the same vista that he remembered as a boy reading the works of Mayne Reid. He wrote, at least I have seen my dream mountains. Most boys never do. Mayne Reid was a favorite of Christopher Morley, Anton Chekhov, Vladimir Nabokov, and Theodore Roosevelt, among other people, this boys novelist of the 1850s and 60s. So Conan Doyle is sent to Hodder, a preparatory school, and then on to Stonyhurst, a Jesuit school in Lancashire. And it was at Stonyhurst that he first realized he had literary abilities far beyond those of mortal men. And he writes this in his memoir. There was my debut as a storyteller. On a wet half holiday, I have been elevated onto a desk, and with an audience of little boys, all squatting on the floor, with their chins up on their hands, I have talked myself husky over the misfortunes of my heroes. Week in and week out, those unhappy men have battled and striven and grown for the amusement of that little circle. I was bribed with pastry. Sometimes, too, I would stop dead in the very thrill of a crisis and could only be set a-going again by apples. When I had got as far as with his left hand in her glossy locks, he was waving the blood-stained knife over her head, when I knew I had my audience in my power. So it's decided he will take a medical degree, and he enters Edinburgh University, where other students include Robert Louis Stevenson and James Barrie of Peter Pan fame. And there are many stories about Dr. Joseph Bell, the surgeon and lecturer who was an inspiration for Sherlock Holmes, which I will not repeat because you have probably heard all of them. In the third year of his medical studies at medical school, he interrupts everything to become the ship's doctor on an Arctic whaler for 6 months, I think. Very haphazardly, as I remember the story, a friend of his says, you know, Arthur, I was going to do this and I can't. So would you like to do it? And he said, yeah, I think I would. So he graduates and becomes entangled with Dr. George Budd, this half genius and half quack. He is an extraordinary character, quote, who always telegraphed and never wrote. Budd's character appears in the Stark Munro letters, and showmanship and this penchant for telegraphy and other characteristics of Budd's behavior, I believe, would turn up later in the character of Sherlock Holmes. And then in 1881, he becomes the ship's surgeon on a steamer to Africa. And after that, he opens up his practice in Southsea. And he divides his time between writing and practicing as a physician in Southsea for about 7 or 8 years, during which time A Study in Scarlet is published and much else, including his first historical novel, Micah Clarke. And there's clearly a reckless nature to his character. He makes snap decisions. He joins the crew of an Arctic whaler. He signs on as a ship's surgeon. Well, equally recklessly, he decides to close his practice in Southsea and become an eye specialist. And he and his wife travel to Vienna, where he finds that his schoolboy German isn't good enough for medical studies. And after some time in Vienna, he moves to London and sets up as an eye specialist. And after, I think, 3 more months or maybe less, during which time it's believed he saw not one patient, he gives up medicine forever and he devotes himself completely to writing. And his wife, Louisa, develops tuberculosis, and they find the climate in Davos in Switzerland beneficial. And Conan Doyle had seen ski running. That's what they called it then, ski running, in Norway. And he began to promote skiing as a hobby. And he had a sense of humor about it, too. He wrote, "There is nothing particularly malignant in the appearance of a pair of skis. They are two strips of elm wood, 8 feet long, 4 inches broad, with a square heel, turned up toes, and straps in the center to secure your feet. No one to look at them would guess the possibilities which lurk in them. But you put them on and you turn with a smile to see whether your friends are looking at you. And then the next moment, you are boring your head madly into a snowbank and kicking frantically with both feet and half rising only to butt viciously into that snowbank again. And your friends are getting more entertainment than they had ever thought you capable of giving." Well, Conan Doyle had at least one success in the theater with a play called Waterloo, which was recommended to the great actor Henry Irving by his business manager, Bram Stoker, who was soon to be the author of Dracula 3 years later in 1897. Irving played an old soldier of Napoleon's army, much like Brigadier Gerard, hero of that series of stories that Conan Doyle published the same year. His wife, Louisa, struggled with tuberculosis for 13 years. In 1899, he published an unusual novel, a duet with occasional chorus. It was a paean to love. It's the story of a newlywed couple, Frank and Maud, and their struggles and successes. And the book was dedicated to Maud, the wife of the story. She may have been a stand-in for Jean Leckie, whom Conan Doyle had met 2 years before and who would become his second wife. He gave her the bound manuscript, and there's a manuscript page there right next to the book. You can't really read too much into that, though. Jean Leckie was very well read and very accomplished. And my personal opinion is that Maud in Duet is a bit of a brick. She is awed by Frank's wide knowledge. There's a wonderful bit of descriptive writing in Duet about the couple's visit to Westminster Abbey. He writes, "They were smiling as they entered, but the smile faded from their lips as the door closed behind them. In this holy of holies, this inner sanctuary of the race, there was a sense of serene and dignified solemnity, which would have imposed itself upon the most thoughtless. In front of them, a great rose window of stained glass, splendid with rich purples and crimsons, showed through a subdued and reverent gloom. And here and there along the aisles, a few spectators moved among the shadows. But all around the walls, 2 and 3 deep, were ranged the illustrious dead, the perishable body within, the lasting marble without, and the more lasting name beneath. It was very silent in the home of the great dead. Only a distant footfall or a subdued murmur here and there." I said Maud was a bit of a brick. Her in the midst of all this, as he's showing her around the abbey, she says, "Why, Frank, who owns all this?" And he says, "We do, Maud." And she says, "You're joking." But Conan Doyle does capture in his fashion what it is like to be in love. They take a trip on the then new London Underground in an empty compartment, and Maud's hair is mussed. Um, well, after that, after their visit to the Abbey, at some other point in the book, they go to the Church of St. Olaf. And this is the resting place of Samuel Pepys. And there's a lovely scene there that I can't read as Conan Doyle wrote it, because they find out where the coffins of Pepys and his wife are, and which is not where they're marked to be. And the verger that they talk to speaks about how they turned up the floor and examined the coffins some time ago, and says, you know, when we first looked in, I saw him lying there quite plain, a short, thick figure of a man with his hands across his chest. And then, just as we looked at him, he crumbled in, as you might say, across his breastbone, and just quietly settled down into a puddle of dust. It's the way they have when fresh air strikes them. And she the same. And his dust just fell through the chinks of wood and mixed itself with hers. Conan Doyle lectured on everything. Oh, there's the Church of St. Olaf, which I'm clearly a slide behind. Conan Doyle lectured on everything, including Thomas Carlyle, Moses Mendelssohn, the Shakespearean stage, the styles of William Dean Howells and Henry James, foreign words in the English language, the genius of George Meredith, the Eiffel Tower, similarities between Ibsen and Tolstoy, and much, much more. And he counted 500 lectures. He may have done more. Um, he was a great reader. He wrote essays about the contents of his library. Through the Magic Door appeared in 1906. He went shelf by shelf, offering opinions about every volume. He was fulsome in his debt to Poe, whom he called the supreme original short story writer of all time. Conan Doyle was a poet. He had written poetry continuously ever since his school days. And one of them was a comic poem called Bendy's Sermon. And it's the story of a prize fighter turned preacher named Bendigo. And what happens is his fighting instincts return when hecklers interrupt his sermon. So he's a prize fighter, he's turned preacher. Old mates of his from the gym come to interrupt his sermon. Tries to think good thoughts for a long while in the poem, but finally he can't stand it anymore. So here are just 6 lines from the poem. He vaulted from the pulpit like a tiger from a den. They say it was a lovely sight to see him floor his men. Platt was standing on his back and looking at his toes. Solly Jones of Perry Bar was feeling for his nose. Connor of the Bull Ring had all that he could do, raking for his ivories that lay about the pew. Some people think that is reminiscent of Casey at the Bat, which came out a few years ago. I don't know about that. Well, it was natural for Conan Doyle, even at 40, to enlist in the army during the Second Boer War, but he was too old and untrained, and luckily a friend of his was equipping a hospital to send to South Africa, and Conan Doyle became the supervisor. He lived and worked in deplorable conditions, saw the effects of terrible disease, treated hundreds of wounded. He stood for Parliament. He stood for Parliament twice and failed. And in time, he thought he was much better off to have lost. And here he wrote about his qualifications for office. He hated the process of electioneering and wrote about it in 1924. It is a vile business, this electioneering, though no doubt it is chastening in its effects. They say that mud baths are healthy and purifying. I can compare it to nothing else. This applies particularly, I think, to Scotland, where the art of heckling has become carried to extremes. This asking of questions was an excellent thing as long as it was honest in its desire to know the candidate's opinion about a public measure. But the honest questions are the exception. And the unfortunate man is baited by all sorts of senseless trick questions from mischievous and irresponsible persons, which are designed to annoy him and make him seem foolish or ignorant. Some reform is badly needed in this matter. I wonder what Conan Doyle would think about electioneering today. His memories of notable people included royalty, American presidents, British politicians, and authors, many authors. P.G. Wodehouse, who was then a reporter, interviewed him after his ascent in a hot air balloon. And he had quite an experience. And here is how Wodehouse quoted him in a piece in VC magazine. First time I went up in a balloon, I was terribly frightened. It was pleasant enough at first, with all the spectators cheering and so on. But when we'd been rising and were a mile from the ground, I looked over the side and I was never in such a miserable fright. It's interesting how, but after I'd been up a little while, I became quite used to it. And I suppose that's what happens to everyone. Well, somehow I think Conan Doyle was not quite everyone. But he told amusing stories about some of the people he met, the noted people he met. And here's a story that he told about his first meeting with Arthur Balfour, then the Prime Minister. Conan Doyle is at a house in the country. He's the guest of Lord Burnham. And he writes, Lord Burnham's hobby was Turkish baths. And he had an excellent one in the front of the house. Now, you know, a Turkish bath is these different rooms you move to from hot with a shampoo and various, there's 3 stages. It's a very dry heat and so on. But, going the wrong way here. Sorry. So, Lord Burnham had an excellent one in the front of the house, the drying room being the first door on the right as one entered. And with his usual kind hospitality, Lord Burnham urged me to try his bath. And having done so, I was placed, arrayed in a long towel, and with another towel screwed round my head in the drying room. And presently the door opened and entered Arthur Balfour, Prime Minister of England. He knew nothing of the house or its ways, and I can remember the amazement with which he gazed at me. Lord Burnham, following at his heels, introduced me, and I raised the towel on my head. There were no explanations, and I felt that he went away with the impression that this was my usual costume. In the First World War, Conan Doyle was again eager to enlist and became a private in the Home Guard Volunteers. And then when he was asked by the Foreign Office to write favorable publicity for the Italian army, he turned it into an opportunity to visit the British front, the Italian front, and the French front. But what to wear? Well, he'd been knighted by this time and named Deputy Lieutenant of Surrey, which gave him the right to wear a uniform with the troops. So he writes, I went straight off to my tailor, who rigged me up a wondrous khaki garb, which was something between that of a colonel and a brigadier, with silver roses instead of stars or crowns on the shoulder straps. As I had the right to wear several medals, including the South African, the general effect was all right. But I always felt a mighty impostor, though it was certainly very comfortable and convenient. I was still a rare specimen, and quite a number of officers of 3 nations made inquiry about my silver roses. A deputy lieutenant may not be much in England, but when translated into French, my French anyhow, it was an awe-inspiring effect, and I was looked upon them as an inscrutable but very big person with a uniform all his own. He wrote another book, A Visit to Three Fronts. Over the years in the Sudan, in the Boer War, in the World War, Conan Doyle kept up a constant stream of suggestions to improve the safety and the lives of the men. He argued for the use of camouflage, for better artillery placement, a democratic, less class-conscious military. He recommended construction of a channel tunnel to avoid a blockade by sea. He spoke about the danger from submarines in wartime. He campaigned for body armor for frontline soldiers. His petitions for flotation collars and rafts for sailors led to the first life jackets. The war brought enormous tragedy to Conan Doyle. He lost his brother, his son, 2 brothers-in-law, and 2 nephews in World War I. You remember that early photo I showed of Conan Doyle and his family in 1904? Well, 4 of the family lost due to the war are there. On the left, his brother Innes and his son. Next, Kingsley, Conan Doyle's son. His sister Caroline's husband, Leslie Oldham. And then came the armistice. And here's how Conan Doyle remembered it. And then at last came the blessed day of armistice. I was in a staid London hotel at 11 o'clock in the morning, the most prim of all the hours of the day, when a lady, well-dressed and conventional, came through the turning doors and waltzed slowly around the hall with a flag in either hand, and then departed without saying a word. It was the first sign things were happening. I rushed out into the streets, and of course the news was everywhere at once. I walked down to Buckingham Palace and saw the crowds assembling there, singing and cheering. A slim young girl got elevated onto some high vehicle and was leading and conducting the singing as if she was an angel in tweeds just dropped from a cloud. On the whole, the people were very good and orderly. They say it was when the Australian wounded met the War Office flappers that the foundations of solid old London got loosened. But we have little to be ashamed of, and if ever folks rejoiced, we surely had the right to do so. We did not see the new troubles ahead of us, but at least these old ones were behind, and we gained an immense reassurance. Britain had not weakened. She was still the Britain of old. Well, it seems to me that there's a lesson in the life of Arthur Conan Doyle that's worth thinking about. I don't know about you, But when I consider what my life sketch would be, my workhorse, my packing crates, my wagon seems a lot lighter than Conan Doyle's. When I think of my life and my memories, I do not see a packing case or a horse or a wagon. I see something a little more elementary. Conan Doyle had many events and accomplishments to recall, but he also made great memories. How did he do that? Could we follow his example and create our own lasting memories? What did he do? Well, it seems to me he did three things. He had a knack for creating moments of elevation, moments of great sensory appeal. An Arctic whaler telling stories around a campfire, strapping on skis. He seems to have gone out of his way to raise the stakes by some of his decisions, becoming an eye specialist, leaving Portsmouth, betting on George Budd, who left him penniless, by the way. The second thing he did was that he celebrated moments of pride. His first published article, his first novel, his triumphs in cricket. When he pitched against the legendary W.R. Grace and got him out, he wrote a poem about it. Research shows that telling things to other people, sharing things with other people, improves recall. And he built moments of connection with many, many, many other people. Much of his life involved struggle, becoming the family breadwinner, bringing his younger brother Innes to Southsea in the early days of his medical practice. He struggled with James Barrie on an unsuccessful play. He struggled with Arthur Sullivan on an opera. He campaigned for innovations in the military when no one really wanted to hear what he thought. Working with other people on something, especially something meaningful, bonds us together. These are lessons we might all benefit from, not just in looking back on our own lives, but in making new memories. And that brings me to a final question. Why is it in the third decade of the 21st century that we still find Sir Arthur Conan Doyle interesting? Perhaps it's because of the contrasts. We live in an age of amnesia. He honored the past. Ours is a social society of texts and T-shirts. Arthur Conan Doyle was ink and paper and corduroy and tweed. Sometimes our world seems to run on ignorance. He was well-read, thoughtful, and informed on any number of topics. He was the soul of knight-errantry. In his day, he was a reassuring presence. The writer Christopher Morley once self-prescribed tincture of Conan Doyle when he was ill and in bed. It sounds to me like a great prescription for all of us. And I don't believe there's a better program for carrying that message forward than annual Worldwide Doyle and the Portsmouth Library. Thank you, Laura, for the opportunity to be here today, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Bert. It's really important to communicate. I wish we'd had everyone's sound on because I think the collective laughing would have really, yeah, it would have been something because I think all of us were chuckling away at moments in your talk. It was just absolutely brilliant.
Oh,
And it is something that I ponder on an awful lot. How did one man do so much? And I've reached half a decade, I wish, half a century. And how on earth, did he manage to squeeze so much in? It's just fascinating, isn't it? And I
mm,
think you're right.
mm.
We have some questions, I am sure. We didn't talk about how we wanted to do this, so please, are you happy for people to come off and
Yes, yes,
speak?
sure, absolutely.
Lovely.
Opportunities to display my ignorance are always appreciated.
Mhm. We do have a message in the comments, which says, "Where did Conan Doyle and Jean Leckie first meet? Do you know?"
Oh, that's a good question. I knew once. I can't recall it off off the top of my head, but I'm sure someone else on the call will know, and we'll put the answer in the chat.
I'm sure. I know that there was a hotel, but I think that was when they were together, wasn't it? They went to a hotel together. I'm sure
Hmm.
someone else will know. We've got another question. Did Arthur Conan Doyle create any other thought-provoking art? Yeah, that's a good one, isn't it?
Thought-provoking art. You know, one of the mysteries that seem to me to remain around Conan Doyle is what happened to his art? Do you know for his voyage on the Arctic whaler, those 6 months that interrupted his medical school studies, he kept an illustrated diary, and his watercolors and his drawings, were really quite competent for someone whose only art training must have been at the side of his father. I can't imagine he had any other art training. But he clearly was engaged and focused on his experience in the Arctic enough to want to preserve images, things we would today be taking our phones out and clicking on. He would, in the evenings, fill out a page in his diary. Um, so what happened to his art? And did he sketch or draw for recreation at any time? I don't know. We have so many even more informed people on the line, like, for example, Mark Jones, and folks like that who may well know more than I do. I don't know. I know the diary's been published, of course.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really fascinating. I think a lot of people used drawing and illustration as a way of communicating, didn't they? Because photography wasn't easy to get hold of. So it must be having two children that don't really do that much art anymore in schools at all. It's that. I guess it must be something along those lines. Mark Jones has said they met at a party in 1897, Jean Leckie and Conan Doyle, but we don't know much more than that, I think. Thank you, Mark. Claire has asked, do you think the losses Doyle experienced World War One led to his interest in spiritualism?
No, his interest in spiritualism goes back much farther than World War One, and goes back to his very early days in Portsmouth. Um, he when he arrived at Southsea, he um, is was a brilliant example of marketing. He had a real marketing sense. I thought it was very interesting. He joined three social clubs. And sports clubs and became very active in. He joined a football team under a pseudonym because he didn't want it to sound like that he was a disreputable character. So he signed up with the football team as A.C. Smith. So he joins all these organizations, including the Portsmouth Literary and Scientific Society. And early on, I think in that time, there were conversations, presentations, discussions at the Portsmouth Literary and Scientific Society about psychic research and about spiritualism. Um, at the time, that was an instantiation of his scientific mind. You have to sort of put that in context. The telephone, was patented by Bell in 1876. And so in the 1880s, we have telegraphy, we've got telephony. people are now communicating across distances that seemed bizarrely impossible instantly. Why could we not communicate with souls that are gone? And there were, all sorts of experiments trying to determine the real nature of a soul. So while many people lampoon Conan Doyle for his gullibility, I tend to think that in the context, it needs to be understood. But it dated much earlier than World War One.
Mm. I've been very privileged to go to the Spiritualist Church in Southsea in Portsmouth, where he went, which is an incredible space. They have a chair that's reserved for him, apparently, which is a lovely thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
We have our lovely Brian. So sorry, a little plug. Um, Brian writes our blog on our website, and he never runs out of ideas. I know that. Brian has many, many, many ideas because he's in the rolling stack with 16,000 books. Brian and I will keep going forever, I think. It's just, they're never going to run out of ideas with the Conan Doyle collection to play with, are you? Edward has asked, what year did Doyle create the old horse sketch?
Well, either 1929 or 1930. I think it was in 1930. He died in July 1930, and he'd suffered at least one heart attack the prior year, I think. But my memory is that the sketch dates from 1930, earlier in 1930.
Brilliant. Brian asks, do you know when Conan Doyle first started to read the stories of Edgar Allan Poe?
Yes, as a child when his mind was plastic, which is what he writes in his memoir. He had a great um, tribute to Poe, and it's something a rare thing that I did not include in my talk for interests of time. But he wrote. I first encountered him when I was a young man and my mind was plastic, and he called Conan Doyle the supreme storyteller of all time and went on to say that, if every author who had, and ideas, he said, flew from Poe's pen, in a flood of ideas and story types. And he said, if every author who could trace their success back to Edgar Allan Poe would put a pebble on a beach or something like that, Poe would have a pyramid as high as Cheops. So he's very enthusiastic and admiring of Poe. And of course, the character of Sherlock Holmes um, owes itself to C. Auguste Dupin, Murder on the Rue Morgue, Purloined Letter, and so on, which are stories about the Chevalier Auguste Dupin and his unnamed narrator. Now, that's sort of where the similarity ends. But, that was sort of the basic construct of the Dupin cases, which are a lot of fun to look at.
Thank you. I've got a quote from Edward. Edward, how do you feel about coming on and giving your quote directly?
Oh, sure. That was the quote that Bert read partly, and that I had just found it in Through the Magic Door. So, I mean, he's
Yes,
already said
please.
that. He was quite young. Do you want me to read that?
Yes, please,
And
sure.
all this didactic talk comes from looking at that old green cover of Poe. I am sure that I had to name the few books which have really influenced my own life. I should have to put this one second only to Macaulay's essays. I read it young when my mind was plastic. It stimulated my imagination and set before me a supreme example of dignity and force in the methods of telling a story. It is not altogether a healthy influence, perhaps. It turns the thoughts too forcibly to the morbid and the strange. So there's so much to unpack in that I love that quote. Thanks for reminding me of it, Bert.
Well, thank you, Ed. And Ed, for our viewers and friends and listeners who might not know this, Ed is at the Rosenbach in Philadelphia, which has some wonderful, wonderful materials, thanks to the late Dr. Rosenbach, that Ed is very effectively promoting and making available to the public, and has his own program of Sherlockian explorations, which you can find out more about.
Thank you, Bert.
Wow.
Thanks for the commercial.
That's what we love. That's great. Thank you. Nice to meet you, Edward. Fantastic. And they keep coming. Here's one from Lawrence. In the old horse drawing, the last vignette shows ACD in bed with the late 1930 above. So it appears he drew this in 1930. Lovely.
Oh, right. Well
Lovely.
spotted. That's right, 1930. Oh, well spotted. And that whole line there is very interesting. He begins at the very top of that drawing with Edinburgh, his birthday, his birth, Stonyhurst, university days, medical practice, skiing. He's made little cartoons of a skier and his visit to Egypt, little drawings of the pyramids. It's a lovely thing. He would reproduce this and send it to people who inquired about his health. Um,
That's such a beautiful thing, isn't it? I think I think there's something in it. I mean, I know I don't believe it for a minute, but you did have an to represent yourself, you had an empty wagon. But I think I really don't believe that. And I do think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think it is about the recall and the memory
Mm.
um, that I'm sure we'd have extremely full wagons if we actually stopped and reflected and thought about what we have done in our lives and, the good, the bad, the ugly, all the things that happen in a human life. So it is quite food for thought, really, in all sorts of different ways, isn't it? As
Mm.
is Conan Doyle full stop. I mean,
It is. It is. I've thought a lot about memory and recall, and there's been a lot of interesting work and research in it in the last 10 years or so. Memories are an imaginative reconstruction of the past, and people find it generally easier to recall positive rather than negative memories. And I think that's a bias that increases as we age. But basically, we prioritize information that helps us navigate and understand the world. And so looking at Conan Doyle's drawing through that lens is, as you say, I think really interesting. And I'm sure we all could do a better job. I'm sure I could do a better job than I can do.
it's interesting, isn't it? And also, you've referenced what other people were thinking of Conan Doyle. And of course, everyone has that aspect where, your memory is very much what you have remembered and captured at that moment. Someone else who was also there would have a completely different memory of that. Yeah.
Right.
Has anyone, I could talk for England, as you all well know, has anyone got any other questions at all? It's gone very quiet. Thank you so much, Bert.
Right.
What a wonderful way to start our Worldwide Doyle program for 2025. I'm prepared this year. I should get scores, really, shouldn't I? How prepared is she each year? 11th of June at 7 p.m. we had Clifford Goldfarb. If Arthur Conan Doyle met Charles Dickens, that's going to be very interesting, isn't it? And again, they all sort of marry together, don't they? The conversations and the talks and the lectures that we have. The 25th of June, we have Dr. Jonathan Cranfield, Conan Doyle, Marriage and Divorce, something else that he advocated for, which will be a really interesting one. And this will be very interesting. Sheldon Goldfarb, Conan Doyle, Misquoter. I'm very excited about that as well. That's going to be, yeah, that's going to be very interesting because I'm going to take that you can say anything and then it doesn't matter if you're wrong and you just bluff it out and you're fine. So that's what I'll do from now on. Um, Thank you as always. We're hoping that all the films will go up with the Doings of Doyle um, podcast, Doings of Doyle YouTube account. We'll have it on our website and wherever else you would like to put it, you are more than welcome. Thank you, Mark. He's got there at the same time as well. So look forward to seeing you all next week. Um, and thank you so much again, Bert. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. It's been really, really interesting. I think please stay in touch because I'd love to talk to you more about Conan Doyle and memory and his life and stories and everything else is just absolutely incredible. And do come and visit us as well in Portsmouth. That would be lovely. We'd love to host you.
Yeah, love to. Thank you, Laura.
Be great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for all your questions and everything else. As always, I'm going to faff around, try and save our chat, and make sure that this recording has properly happened, and make sure I save it somewhere sensible as well. Thank you all. Goodbye. Good night. Take care.
Mm.
Add Portsmouth to that trolley cart. I like that. That sounds good.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.
Mm.